Hello and welcome to the next episode of the AV Experience. I'm your host, Ryan from Ascend Audio Video, joined by the glorious, the beautiful Ben Goff from Cinema Bureau. It is a wonderful Monday morning here in the United States and a Monday afternoon in the UK and whatever time it is around the world. Hopefully you had a great weekend. But we're here today to shed light on SPL and power and CEA 2010. And we're going to see where this goes because now Ben has embraced the true AV experience and is not prepared. So this is the way, my friend. This is how we do things. We fly by the seat of our pants. And honestly, the less prepared we are, the more entertaining the streams are. Because the data comes out. I mean, we're going to showcase. We just don't know where we're going to end up. And I think
I had a plan what I wanted to talk about today, and work has got in the way, paying clients, and I
threw that away.
Have not spent time preparing. So, yeah, we're gonna seat my pants in.
I think it's dynamic. We'll call it dynamic. That's a great word for this. It's a dynamic stream. It's a dynamic.
I think we're going to cover some useful info. Luckily, what I want to talk about, I've stood in front of classrooms and given live to paying students.
We've both talked about this a lot.
So we're going to roll back what I've taught at an actual proper industry training, and we're going to talk about the basis of that. So I know that I know my stuff because I have taught this before, and we're going to roll it back to a point where it's useful and relevant to what people listening can actually do. So yeah, we'll be fine.
I had something I was going to say, and then it immediately went away when it was going to come out of my mouth. Anyway, are we ready for this spec sheet? Is that where you want to start?
Well, before we see it, I'm gonna bounce a question to you. Let's see where we end up. So, how loud let's pick a speaker. I know we won't pick your swans, but we'll pick a mythical speaker. Right? You're out shopping. You're about to buy a speaker. You're in a hi-fi store. How loud will it play?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I mean, how would you go about even guessing how loud that speaker will actually play?
Yeah, I hate guessing. I don't like guessing.
Do you think you could work it out?
Frankly, if there's too many variables for me to do that, right? I can't. If I'm in one room, I cannot tell you how loud a speaker is going to be because it's going to change as soon as I put it in a different room because the room is the dominant factor in a lot of these things. Unless I can see and hear and do things anechoically, it doesn't matter.
Right. So I like to talk quite a lot about how much, when do speakers fail? That's one of my hot topics, is that we kill speakers for two reasons, the thermal or excursion. So this speaker you're now looking at in a hi-fi store, how much can you push it before it will break? Do we know? Can we guess? Can we even guess? That's the first thing. Like, will we have any clue at all?
I don't like guessing. I don't like, if I don't have if I don't have measurement data, I'm not going to buy a speaker.
Right. So we're going to pull up a spec sheet, and I have just grabbed this off Tinterweb a minute ago. So people are going to recognize the speaker. You recognized it immediately before you'd even opened it. You were like, I know what that is.
Because I'm in the industry and I've looked at a lot of spec sheets. I know exactly who this is based on what it looks like.
Sure. Okay. So I have not picked this spec sheet
before we jump into this.
Right?
Yes.
Actually, it's really obvious who it is because they've got a proprietary technology that's listed there. I didn't realize I'd done that.
We're not picking on anybody. This is actually a better one in comparison to what other manufacturers will provide.
Right.
This is simply using this as a metric effectively to tell you why you can't get useful information from this.
Right. So now I've actually realized it says UniQ. We can be honest.
It's KEF.
This is a KEF spec sheet. Okay. This has come from KEF's website. Now, I am not
right here, though. I do want to throw this out in that there are every other manufacturer that I can count on one hand and probably just a couple fingers that also provides measurement data. still lists spec sheets like this.
Absolutely.
So this is not us picking on. If I called Kef, they would give me the information that I need. So this is not me picking on them. Kef will deliver what I need. I have a good relationship. They've given me spin data on stuff. This isn't us picking on them. I really want to reiterate this. This is just us using them as an example.
100%.
And Ben is a failure for picking a spec sheet that told you what.
We should have found one that wasn't identifiable, and that's a failing for me. As I said, not prepared today. But there's some good things and bad in here, so we'll talk about both, right? But the first one, the one that concerns me the most is
there we go.
Amplifier requirements 50 to 300
I hate that.
What does it mean?
What does it mean?
What honestly, like, I genuinely don't know what it means.
Can you use all 350 watts of that? Will I blow up the speaker if I use all 350 watts of that? What does it mean?
What happens if we've got 50? What happens if we've got 300?
I don't know. Will the speaker not work if I use a 5 watt amplifier? Will it just not play sound? What happens?
I don't know, right? I mean, I do know, but I can't tell from that spec sheet. So this one at least is not as irritating as my pet hate. And I should have found one that actually says the worst, most annoying thing. Recommended power, 200 watts. That. Okay, well, you're recommending 200, but what happens at 300? Does it melt? Do we hit the excursion limit? Like, why are you recommending 200? What specifically about 200? Do you like 200 watt amplifier? Do you make a 200 watt amplifier? Why are you recommending 200 watts?
Who knows?
Pray tell. So, yeah, right. This bit just immediately kills engineering for us. But they've given us something really great the other end. So, maximum output, peak sound pressure level at 1 meter with pink noise. That's pretty cool. That's more useful than most, certainly in the hi-fi world, that's more useful than most data sheets. Because they've clarified what they mean. If they had just put maximum output 113.5 dB, I would have no idea what it means. But they've told me it's a peak level, it's at 1 meter, and the test tone was pink noise. Okay, that's pretty cool. So it would be really great to know which pink noise, like how there's not a single unified pink noise that is used across everything in the industry. So it would be great to know exactly which pink noise that is. We can guess that this measurement has been done using a Clipple. We can guess what they've used, but we kind of don't need to. That pink noise is going to be somewhere between 9 and 13 dB of crest factor. It's going to fall in that range. So we can make really good, educated guess now about what that speaker will do. What I still don't know, let's see if you can spot on that. I haven't looked at this in depth. How loud could you play that before it melts? Can we tell? I don't think we do know.
I don't think you can. There's no way to tell. The closest you can get is the amplifier requirements, but we have no idea what that means. And let me show you one. I'm going to jump to one that is solid. And it also has some shortcomings. Sorry. What am I doing? Hold on. Now I have to open the window because I'm a dunce. Desktop. I think it's this one. Let's do this one. Can you see that?
Yeah, I've got you.
Okay. So I know who this is. I know you know who this is.
Sure.
By looking at this. But
I mean, it says the word recommended Ascendo amplifiers on the screen.
So
you've done a
stop ruining my fun, Ben.
You've done a worse job than I did.
But this is power handling. So when we're talking about how much can a speaker handle, this is more of what you want. But, and I'm going to pick on Jeffrey here. What is that necessarily? Is that all frequencies? Is that across the whole range? What does that mean? Like, am I going to blow the speaker up if I send 900 watts at a lower range versus a higher range? What's going to happen there?
Sure. Now, the difference here is that some of this data is great. And so we can see, right, let's look at SPL straight there, okay? He is telling us that these are peak levels in half space. So it's a 2 pi calculation. I'm not sure we've discussed why this is called 2 pi.
Well, let's talk about that real quick.
So a low frequency driver would put sound out omnidirectionally, you know, a perfect low frequency source. As it gets higher in frequency, it's a wavelength versus cone size. It's going to begin beamforming, and it will start sending out the sound more directionally. We've talked about that in a previous episode. But at the low end, pretty omnidirectional. It will be a full sphere of sound. So when we do the formula for the surface area of a sphere, it has a term in it which is 4 pi. If we're looking at a hemisphere, so we've now built a solid wall and the sound is only radiating forwards from that wall, we have a maximum propagation that is in a hemisphere. That formula has a term now which has got 2 pi in it. So the important thing to understand here, where that 4 pi and 2 pi is derived from, is surface area of a sphere, because that's how we're actually looking at sound power as it propagates. It is the radiation. So he's told us here that these are in half space. So we know this speaker was tested essentially with a baffle wall. It was either in a baffle, on a baffle, but
which is how those speakers are designed. I mean, they're meant to be using a baffle. So it's the
so
part
we
that
now know that, right? So that's great. And then he has given us a 123 dB continuous and 135 dB peak. So funny enough, there's a 12 dB difference between those. How many dB crest factor did I say that pink noise was going to have? 12. Because turns out there's 12 dB of crest factor here between his continuous rating and his peak.
And if you actually go look at the spin data for all of his speakers, it will tell you the crest factor. So this is all useful information because it gives you an idea of what the speaker is going to do. Now, one thing that Kef gave us that this one isn't is in the measurement report I don't remember in the bottom if it did, what pink noise or what test tones were actually utilized to be able to know how the data was derived. So I don't know that there's ever been a perfect measurement. Like, I have everything that I need, but there are some that get close. And again, we're only looking at spec sheets. This is still in a way useless unless I can corroborate it with the rest. This gives me a quick understanding of, okay, I have this big of a room. I know this speaker can handle 900 watts. I can do some rough calculations and I can figure out, will this speaker theoretically be able to handle that size room? And then I can go through and look at the spin data, CEA2034, CEA2010, and figure out, is this the speaker that I want? So this is great at a glance. And I think people need to use this as a reference for that. This is not the only thing you should be looking at when you look at a speaker, because it is not telling you everything you need to know. It's telling you the limits, but it doesn't specify, in my opinion, enough about those limits to be able to determine, is it what I want for my space or experience?
I don't recall now from the KEF one, and we can go back and check. So, you know, I spend quite a lot of time with Mr. Aylett. You know, that's a joy of having him as a business partner. One of the things that I do know, if I'd asked Peter, how loud will that speaker play? I already know the exact words that would have come out of his mouth. Like, without any shadow of a doubt, the next words he would have said were, at what frequency?
Yeah.
It would be physically impossible for him to not reply with that question. Like, his brain would not allow it, right? That would have to be the answer. At what frequency? So what the Ascender one's done, and obviously they give us a report which does this in more detail, but it tells us Okay, we're at 124 dB continuous. But once we get down to 60 hertz, that's dropped to 118. Once we get to 40 hertz, that's dropped to 100. So I'd actually love to see an 80 hertz figure there. We can get it from the data they give us, but 80 is really useful because what we are likely to do with this speaker is bass manage it. This speaker wasn't designed as a full range speaker. It's designed to be bass managed.
Yes.
So if I get a speaker that says, right, you can play this to 123 dB, but once I bass manage it, can I get more level than that? Because we're going to hit our limitation. Our excursion limitation is going to hit first at the low frequency. We have to get a squaring of displacement from that driver as the frequency goes down. Like, it ramps up massively, the amount of air we have to move. So you're going to run out of steam in the low frequency first. So if this just said peak SPL is 100 dB and they could do that to 40 hertz, I would never specify it at all, because I would be like, wow, that speaker is like a really big, expensive speaker. It can only get 100 dB peak. Like, that's useless to me. I'm going to need more than that. I'm never going to sell it. So immediately this would be off of all of my shortlists.
But this is that's a great point. An example on this. Does it give peak output?
Well, they give peak at 113.5.
113. So this is a great example. Where is that peak? You don't, and this is showing this is important because the speakers, every speaker, just like a sub, will roll off.
Right.
That if it's ported, it's 24 dB per octave. If it's sealed, it's 12 dB per octave. That is what's going to happen. So he's effectively specifying the roll off. And if you followed that, it's probably going to follow pretty close to 24 dB per octave, which is actually
so
close. So, but if you look
we
back,
know once we bass manage this speaker, we can go up to about 123 continuous. If we tried playing it full range, it's going to fall off a cliff. It's telling us right there, you have to bass manage the speaker.
Yes. And we're going to look at,
or limit its output to 100 dB. You can play it full range, or you can play it down to 40 hertz if you go down to 100 dB, but you're losing 23 dB of headroom across the whole system. So the KEF does that differently, and we'd have a different question. Frequency response plus minus 3 dB is 43 hertz to 35 kilohertz. Okay, so it's pretty flat. Its roll off, its 3 dB point, the F3, it's down at 43 hertz. So it plays really low. There's only 3 dB difference at 43 hertz to its peak level. But what we don't know is how loud it can do that.
Now let's go back and look at the Ascendo here. We're looking at data now in conjunction with the spec report. Let's do this.
While you're doing that, I'm going to answer Derek's question. I have actually got my chat window open today. So he's asked some questions around that half space, full space. So so the formula for a surface area of a sphere is 4 pi r squared. Remembered it. So for a hemisphere would be 2 pi r squared. For quarter space, so
1.
We're now at half a hemisphere, a quarter of the sphere, it would be pi r squared. So he said, is pi, aka quarter space? Absolutely. So we are literally just looking at that surface area of a sphere. Full space is 4 pi r squared, half space is 2 pi r squared, quarter space is pi r squared. When we start tucking a subwoofer right down into a corner, and we're corner loaded in 3 corners, we might go down to half pi r squared. We're going to keep on going down because it's radiating into a really small area. But that is exactly where those numbers have come from. Just to
so now let's look at the SPL peak and half space. So it's giving this in the spec report, and this is where that data is derived from.
Right.
So if we look at this, hey, look, 100 dB at 40 hertz. It all coincides. And this is the slope that I was talking about. And this illustrates why, If I say at 123 hertz, which is somewhere in here, you're getting that 100, what was it, 128, 123? What was that?
123 continuous.
123 continuous. You're going to be somewhere in here, which is 123 dB continuous.
So
this is why this is an important factor to consider, because you can see, hey, we're rolling off. And if I tell you that this speaker can play 123 dB continuous with no other information, people are likely to assume that I can get that across the entire frequency range, and that is not true.
So if we're going to talk about how loud a speaker will play, we always have to say at what frequency or across what frequency range.
Yes.
Now, this one's really interesting, and I haven't considered this much before I say it, but without being disingenuous to that spec sheet, they give the 60 hertz number. You'll see actually at 80 hertz, it's less output. They don't give us an 80 hertz number, but actually it goes back a bit. Now, this is really useful to me, not just for this speaker. This speaker's hugely capable. It takes a massive amount of power, and it's going to play loud enough for almost certainly what my clients
For most
want in a
applications.
really big room, right?
Yeah.
You don't need this speaker to be loud, right? It's a loud speaker, a high output speaker. But let's just say all of these numbers were way lower and I did need to chase output. Well, it might be that I could start to say, do you know what? I don't think we're going to have a problem if we raise our bass management crossover up to 90 hertz. We may start to get a little bit more directionality, but for the reduction in distortion that speaker will do, because we're going to push it slightly less hard, this speaker has more output at 90 by, what about 3 dB maybe, I think we're looking there?
It actually may be a little more than that, but we'll call it 3 or 4.
So from 90 to 80, this speaker has got, I'm going to say 3 dB more output.
Which is significant.
Within its distortion range. So these targets are distortion limited. So they are, the test is failed if you hit distortion.
That's a good point. That is another piece of information that he may have further down in the spec sheet, that the speaker can play louder than this.
Right.
That's important to note. It can absolutely play significantly louder than this, but he has specified a distortion limit that limits where they say, hey, it failed this. This is what we're putting as the limit for that speaker.
Yeah. And he wouldn't have specified that number. It's in the test standard.
Yes,
so
it's down, I think, where
standard, which it's predefined, and the reason for these being standards is I want to know if I'm choosing between 10 speakers, I need to know that the data I'm looking at is comparable across each, because it's really unfair to look at this speaker and say, oh, it plays to 123 dB. If we're only talking up to, let's say, where is 123 on here? That's 120 hertz, maybe higher, right?
Here.
So if another speaker is saying, oh, we play to 115, but they're giving that down to 50 hertz, and this one, he's picking his continuous number at a higher level, well, that's not apples to apples at all. That's not easy to compare. Once we get this data and we see the full range of voltage passed, not only can I see how loud it will be at any frequency, I can make sensible decisions. Where do I want my crossover? Will this integrate well with the subwoofers I've chosen? That's really important. Like really important.
And this is something that we put into practice in the MadVR Experience Center. We recognized this and noted that in the surrounds, especially because they're surrounds, we push the crossover frequency up in order to gain that headroom, because the point of the MadVR Experience Center is we're going to push the limits. I mean, it is not unheard of in that room for us to push into the 140s. So
I would say that you took a decision there.
Yes.
Right? You made a decision. Now, if you're doing that for a client, you'd have that conversation.
Yes.
Or as an enthusiast, you need to have that decision with yourself.
But how can you make that without the data?
Right. But you can make that decision with the data and say,
yes,
do I want the system to play 3 dB louder, or do I want a crossover at 80 hertz?
Yep. And
if I push my crossover to 110, I can go 3 dB louder. Which one of those compromises is more important to me?
Exactly. It's without the data, you can't figure out what compromise you are making in order
Right.
to achieve your goal. And here I can clearly see what the compromise is when I am making that decision. Every decision you make, and this is kind of a life lesson, but we're going to keep it specific to home theater. There is a compromise in some way. Sometimes it's money, right? If I want everything, I'm going to spend more typically.
Yeah.
However, even when you get to those limits, like what we're talking about now, there is a limit with how, if you push far enough, money still runs out, right? You're not going to be able to get anything better that's going to deliver something at some point, and you're going to have to make a decision based on compromise. And
100%.
here, we're making that an informed decision. That is what we're trying to get to everybody is you need to be able to make informed decisions. And even when you get this, right? Or this, I cannot make informed decisions based on that information.
Right.
That is a rough estimate that says, oh, maybe this is a speaker worth my time looking into. And then what I do is I get information like this, and I'm able to make determinations for how that speaker is going to behave when I put it into my overall system. Because that's the other part of this is remember, and I think we may need to talk about this a little bit. This is only one part of the equation. The speaker is one part of the system. If we don't feed the speaker correctly by giving it enough power, say we're going to clip, or have the voltage clip coming out of the preamp, which I think a lot of people don't consider, regardless of the information you're going to get here, you may come up in a shortcoming. So, yes, it's great to look at this, but this is only one part of the sum. And it's really important to look at the sum of all of the parts to get to the overall picture of what you're trying to, the goal you're trying to reach.
Right. So I think the next bit there, if we look back at, let's bring the Kef's one back up for a second.
For anybody just joining us, we are not picking on anybody. We came in unprepared, which is the AV experience way. And Ben's like, oh, you won't be able to tell who this is. And then it says Uniq. And then I did the same thing with the other one. You won't be able to tell what this one is. Ascendo amplifier. It's like, ah!
So we're not picking on these. Like what these speakers do, they are both great. I think the key thing is they are fit for purpose, right?
Absolutely.
These speakers are absolutely fit for purpose.
And Kef will tell you
data we know.
This is not a reference level speaker.
Can deal with this.
Right? Kef will tell you if you ask them, you should not be playing to those levels that you're asking.
Right.
Pick something else. That's not what this speaker was designed to do.
Absolutely.
It's designed to meet another expectation. Kef, historically on their high-end speakers, they're going for perfectly flat frequency response. They're going for a lot of other things. They're not trying to chase output. So it's important also to look at what the speaker was designed to do and use it within that expectation. So here, all we're saying is, how can you make informed decisions with this data?
So one of those important decisions, and this is something that I do focus a lot on. It's like a buzz for me that I do talk about a lot, is where does that speaker fail? Like, and to me, this is so fundamental because you've invested a lot of money in these products. You need to be able to get the output you were intending. If you've designed an output level, you want to know you can get there safely and that you're not going to melt it or just simply blow it up. So Kef have given us this maximum output, a peak sound pressure with pink noise at 113.5 dB. So we can make some assumptions about that, but we don't actually know which test they were doing and why it failed that test at that level. So the fact it's a pink noise actually suggests that what they were doing was a continuous SPL test, and they've derived a peak number from it, because if they were doing a specific peak level test, they would have almost certainly not used pink noise. So if they were using the AES-75 test, which has a peak rating, you would be using M noise. So they've essentially told us that they're not doing AES-75 because they pink noise. So we already know that it's not an AES-75 test. So we can derive that. We weren't told which test it is, but we can establish it isn't M noise. So it's not AES-75. So if we assume that the test they're doing is 2034A, which is where the spinorama data we talked last week, it's the same document, the same established standards. That has a continuous test which does use pink noise. So we could assume that that is the test they've done.
Yes.
That then leads us to a challenge here, because that test is a test to find continuous output, not actually find peak output.
And peak output in a lot of cases is much more important than continuous when you're dealing with audio.
Different failure mode. One is thermal, one is excursion. So I'm going to assume, and I could be completely wrong, and I am absolutely happy to take feedback from somebody at Kev's engineering team or a Kev rep to say that I have interpreted this data wrong, but I'm interpreting it as a professional who understands these engineering points. If I can't understand it, a consumer certainly can't. So I'm going to try to interpret what they've done. And if I'm wrong, I apologize. I'm not trying to slander anyone here. I am absolutely not trying to say this is what they've done. I am trying to guess what they have done.
Well, and you're doing what, frankly, more than what a general consumer would do, because you know what these tests are doing. So, but if you take this in a broader sense, this is what anybody has to do when they look at this data. You have to make inferences and frankly guesses on what is actually occurring and how that data was derived.
Right. So if my guess is correct and it's the CTA test, what they will have done is they use something called a transfer function. So they play the pink noise. But essentially, the signal is split. They play it to the speaker, which is measured by a microphone, and they also play it directly to their measurement equipment. So they can see this is the signal going direct to measurement equipment and taking the other route via the speaker to the microphone. So they can check something called coherence. You can check that when I put this signal in, it matches what comes out of a speaker to a certain degree of accuracy. As we start to raise the level, there is going to be a point when distortion becomes so loud, those signals don't match to enough consistency. Or the signal gets larger, you've turned the gain up, the signal that is going direct through the measurement system gets larger, but the microphone doesn't record anything louder because the speakers run out of room. So this test, you essentially establish a level using 2.83 volts. You then begin to turn the volume up. And what will happen is you keep going up. You leave it a couple of minutes, you go up. You leave it a couple of minutes, you go up a couple of minutes. And your stop condition is you've lost coherence because there's too much distortion, or you have thermal compression or excursion compression, like you have your compression limited. So you turn the gain up, and the level coming out of the speaker didn't increase. So then you hold it at that level for a couple more minutes. As long as it stays at that level, that's sort of your final result. You don't go louder, because we now know we're at the limit of this speaker won't go louder if we turn it up more, because it physically can't. It's reached that point. And that will give you a continuous output rating. Now, what I think Kef have done, and I could entirely be wrong, I am absolutely open to the idea I'm wrong here, but what I think they will have done is found their continuous rating, and they know that pink noise has a 12 dB crest factor. So they've added 12 dB to their continuous rating to say, in fact, it might be 9. We'll confirm how many they've added based on what the crest factor of a continuous signal was. Slightly unsure exactly how many they've added, but let's say 12. I know manufacturers who have used 12 as the number. They take their continuous rating, they add 12 dB and say, well, that is the peak level we reached, because when we failed this test, we know there was 12 dB of crest factor, and we were able to play that without failing the test. So therefore, our peak must be 12 dB higher than continuous.
That
That is not how that test is supposed to be conducted.
And I bring this up because Jeffrey Fry brings this up, and I think this is important. And Kef needs to do better about this. Kef provides a lot of information, but they hide it.
Right.
Why do they do this? I don't know. So this is us talking about this in a vacuum, right? Most people are not going to go
100%.
find the information that I'm about to show you. And frankly, they could take a lot of this verbiage out and just show the graphs, right? I think that would do them better. I'd like to see both, but let's look at this real quick. So if I go, I'm going to make another thing here.
So this has come from Jeff making the point, I think, in our chat that there is a white paper with data. So this is why it's really important that we are not trying to pick on any particular brand.
Absolutely.
We were just picking on that spec sheet because it's the one I happened to grab just before we started. I accept I was under prepped. Now, it's not to say they don't have loads more data, because actually, as it turns out, they do have loads of data if you click somewhere else. I'm picking on a spec sheet in general. Like, we did say that this company absolutely does do proper engineering and will be fit for purpose and would have this data. We're just picking on the fact that the data that gets put out realistically by the marketing department, all of the graphs in this white paper, that data has been collected by the engineering department. The engineering department, pulled together all of the actual real measurement data, and marketing build a spec sheet from it. So that's just the reality.
There's a lot more data here. A lot more data here. And this is more of the data that we'd want to see. I would like to see this in bigger graphs because this is really compressed and it's really hard to see what's actually going on. I'd like to see this larger so you can see what's going on.
Sure.
But they give you a ton of information in here. Now, I haven't read through this to know what doctrine they're following to get a lot of this information. But I mean, most of the information that you're wanting is in here.
Yeah, they're publishing Spinorometers. So I think it is fair to assume that they are doing 2034. If they're not, they're certainly doing parts of it. It may say it in, I don't know. I haven't read it, but it's safe to assume that this data has come from a 2034 process.
Right. So we were talking about distortion.
So the challenge is, if it is 2034, the method by which they are reporting peak data is not in line with the method described in 2034.
And that's what I mean, that I don't know how this information was derived.
Right.
I don't know where it came from. And that's part of this equation. If you don't know how a conclusion was reached, how can you tell the authenticity or the scale of the data, right? If I say I went, I don't know, if something did X, but I don't tell you how X did that, it doesn't really mean anything. I could say that in a AV terms that this phone reproduced 1 hertz, because technically it does.
Absolutely.
But if I don't tell you at what SPL it did, it's meaningless.
Right. 100%.
And that's what we're trying to get here, is that the data is only part of the equation. You have to know how the data was obtained. And that's why having the standards and seeing what type of approach was taken is important. And we're not saying that Kef didn't do X, Y, or Z. They could frankly say it in here.
100%.
But I don't know.
Yeah. It still gives me the challenges of what is, if we picked another brand who just has a spec sheet without the white paper, and they exist, right? So maybe Kef was an unfair choice. We're absolutely not picking on it, right? I just wanted one that all I was really looking for was somebody who gave me amplifier requirements with a range, because I just can't tell from that data what that means.
So it does.
So that's how they ended up on that. On our list today of what we've used is purely because they had a spec sheet which gave us a range of power.
So it does give you spinorama data top, like if you look really close in
Yeah,
here, but it's only referencing the CEA2034. It doesn't mention anything else about any of this other information about how any of this data was derived. That's like, I don't know
absolutely.
where
And
this
I
came
could
from,
have been,
but it does specify when you get down in here, um, for the other speakers that are in this list, that this is spin data and that this is your dispersion plots. That's the only information that I can
yeah.
see on a quick glance of how this was obtained.
And we could have been mean here, and we could have chosen a really bad data sheet. And one of the reasons I didn't want to pick a bad data sheet on purpose is because somebody will recognize it. And I can sit here in good faith and say, I am confident that Kev speaker will have been engineered by somebody that is conscientious and it
Yes.
is fit for the purpose they intended it to be.
Yes.
If we had intentionally picked a poor data sheet, I wouldn't be able to sit here and say, I'm sure this is a great speaker. I just like more data. I'd in fact be saying, that's probably a rubbish speaker. It was designed by a charlatan.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone would recognize it. And, you know, it's a world of pain for me just because I can't be bothered with people to moan at me all the time. So we've picked data sheets that we think are from competent products. That's really important.
And we're not limiting it. We're trying to cover our bases here because I think it's important for consumers, because I know a lot of consumers watch this. We're not limiting it to these are the only manufacturers you should look at. I think these are two manufacturers that you absolutely should look at because they're not hiding behind anything. They're publishing data and they're
Yeah.
showing you what their products are delivering and how they're delivering it in a objective and scientific way. But that does not mean that these are the only ones that you should limit your search to.
Right. So while we've been talking, I've opened another spec sheet, which does have, you can click through and get a bigger data sheet. I mean, the bigger data sheet is no better particularly. But this particular one I'm looking at now says recommended amplifier power, 30 to 300 watts into 8 ohms on unclipped program. What does it mean? Genuinely, what does it mean?
I like the unclipped program part too.
Which, like, it just doesn't tell me anything about what amplifier to actually spec with that product. So you're entirely guessing. Now, you might choose to put a 300 watt amplifier with it, and it doesn't really like being powered by a 300 watt amplifier. You know what? We don't know what recommended means. So what I would actually like is give me a real number. So RP1, when it comes out, it is in draft and peer review, so I can't confirm exactly what things will be. But realistically, RP1 is going to define that when you give us SPL data, you give it, there's 3 options. There's a long-term power, continuous power, and short-term power. So continuous will be midterm. So it's long-term, midterm, and short-term. Long-term is essentially a level that it will survive for at least 8 hours without melting. It'll be the AES2 test, is an 8-hour long test, right? You can be pretty confident you can run it at that level. You know, you can have a party and leave it at that level all night. It's fine. It's not going to fail over 8 hours at that level. Continuous, it's a couple of minutes, and peak is instantaneous peaks. I do not see the real value in using the peak tests. I don't use that data in our engineering. I think it's slightly misguided. I'm really interested in that continuous number. Mm-hmm. And then deriving from that if it can do what I want continuously. But once we know that, we can actually work out what voltage do I need to supply to the speaker to make it do that. Then I can pick an amplifier that can deliver that voltage at that frequency for that sustained amount of time, at that impedance, oh, I can start to actually match an amplifier and a speaker that can comfortably drive unclipped to the level I want.
Now, Ben is not saying that you are tonally matching amplifiers to speakers like some people will go down that pathway and do. He's saying you need to match the capabilities of the amplifier to what the speaker can deliver so that you're not providing inadequate power to what a speaker is able to handle. That's what he's saying.
Correct. I'm just trying to read this question now. Let's quickly read. Would you say that people who boost the bass a lot isn't listening loud enough? Okay, right. So that's actually a really interesting one, and we'll jump to that. And it has a real key point about the SPL you showed, how it rolls off at the bottom end. And, we would know with that ascendo where we saw all that data that we have to use that with a subwoofer, right? We would see that because we know it rolls off. So there has been a lot of work done in the research community about how we hear. And as we turn the level up, our sensitivity to different frequencies changes.
Yes.
So these are called equal loudness curves or Fletcher-Munson curves. And what will happen is at low levels, you're very insensitive to bass, right? You just don't hear that much bass when you're listening quiet. Like, we just don't perceive it. As we turn the level up, we increasingly start to perceive that bass. So if you turn the level down overall and you leave your calibration exactly the same, right? You calibrate the system and then you turn its level down, you will naturally perceive there is no longer enough bass. So we almost need a variable level of bass depending on the level we're going to listen to the system at. So you'll see that as we go down to the left-hand side, which is low frequencies, they're really compressed together. So over a short range of increase, we're moving up those levels, right? They're compressed together. Like below 60 fons, we basically don't hear that bass. And then suddenly they start to crack in quite quickly together. So we have this range where our sensitivity to bass is very different. Like as you go up beyond that, you'll see that sensitivity changes again. But when we're looking at 1,000 hertz, sensitivity basically stays the same, right? So you raise the level by 10 dB, it sounds 10 dB louder. You raise it another 10 dB, it sounds 10 dB louder. We have this linear relationship from how loud it is to how loud we perceive it, which does not stay linear in that same way in the bass. It's completely different. So this question of if you're boosting the bass, is it a tonality and a level thing? Yeah. And this is why it's really important to know how much bass can your system output at the level you want to listen to.
And this is a big part of what dynamic EQ is trying to fix in a lot of situations, is the lower you have the SPL on your preamp, the more it's trying to boost the bass, or to I have it backwards. Yeah.
It boosts the bass as you turn the volume down.
The bass in order to make it perceived to be even.
Yeah.
If it doesn't do that, and I think this is the issue that a lot of people run into, it feels anemic.
Right.
And you have to turn it up. But as you turn it up, it's going to feel, if you're not using a dynamic process and you've boosted, let's say you EQ'd at a very low SPL level, it's going to be out of control when you get up to a higher level, because you've added in all of this bass to give you an more even perception lower. I think, and I'm going to throw this out there, this is something that I've realized, the more we listen, and Ben, I think you'll agree, the more we realize that the pursuit of increased bass is the pursuit of, I think you're trying to overcome an inadequacy in the room in a lot of situations. You're boosting the bass in order to chase something because you can't get what you're after through another means.
Yeah, I think that's likely. It's, we've talked before about how loud you should listen. And here's the problem, this is a problem that falls repeatedly, that you calibrate a system at one level, but then you may not listen to it at that level you calibrated it at.
Yeah.
So if you calibrate a system really loud, and you sit and you do demos, right? After your calibration, you're running it really hot, right? And you're pushing it to its limit, and you're like, right, that's perfect. That's exactly how I want it. And every time you're listening back during your calibration system, your session, you're doing that really loud. Great. Now you've set the amount of bass you need for that level. But then, maybe your wife and kids come back, like you haven't got the house to yourself anymore. You've done this when you're home alone and you're making as much noise as you want. And then you're trying to be a respectful member of that family in that family home and not annoy everyone. And you turn the level down by 20 dB.
Yeah.
Well, we can see that if you've gone from 100 fonts to 80, you've taken it off the screen now, so I can't see how many it needed to go. But you probably needed a bass boost. 100 is basically flat and linear. So if you've gone down to 80, you need about a 10 dB bass boost to make that perceivably as linear as it was at 100. You've got to ramp the level up as you bring that level down to get the same theory of response that you were getting when you listen louder. So that's a challenge. Like I always say to people, do your calibration listening at the level that you're going to actually use the system at.
Yeah.
And maybe have 3 presets. We do it all the time. We create I'm going to listen flat out on a Friday night and I'm going to go for it calibration, and I'm watching films with the kids 20 dB down from that has a different tonality. It's not that hard if you consider you're doing it. And this is to bring it to our topic of the day, you need to know that if you're listening lower, you need to put that bass boost in. So when you're speccing speakers and subs, it's all well and good to say, right, it goes to 123 dB. But if you pick that Ascendo speaker without a subwoofer, well, it fell off a cliff. It was, it was way down. You cannot give yourself that bass boost. You can't do it. So you actually need to make sure that your target allows for that bass boost that you're going to want.
Now you're saying you can't do it without it being bass managed.
Correct. Well, that speaker, you'd have 2 options, right? You could either take that speaker and apply a 20 dB bass boost, which would bring it back up to essentially being flat, but then you lose all your headroom. You've got to lower the whole level of everything by 20. You could apply a global 20 dB reduction, boost the bottom end up, make it more flat, but now you've got a ceiling of how loud you can listen without blowing the speaker up, right? You have to trade one off from the other. It's why people often talk about only ever cut, don't boost. Well, boosting's fine if you then apply a global cut. All you do when you boost is you're lowering the amount of headroom you've got, how loud you can turn the rest up. The boost itself doesn't cause you to break the speaker. It's boosting and then turning the speaker up as loud as everything else needed to go.
Do you think that a lot of residential systems, especially ones that enthusiasts do, encompass people turning up the bass and not the speakers because the speakers run out of gas before the subs do? I find in a lot of situations that you end up with this bloated bass because anything above the bass managed frequencies just isn't loud enough. And I find the more I listen, the louder I want the speakers to play in conjunction with the subs because it sounds more balanced. Now, if I went back 10 years, I think I would have the opposite feeling. But I think a lot of that stems from not having speakers that are capable of getting to the SPL levels that you're wanting your subwoofers to play. And because we're perceiving and mistaking distortion as loudness, we're mistaking how we need to apply for that balance. We're like, oh, well, I like more bass and I want my mains to be lower. When in actuality, you would probably want your mains to be higher, but you feel like you don't because you're running into distortion.
Yeah, 100%. And, we're way less sensitive to distortion at low frequencies. So you can tolerate a lot more distortion in your subs than you can in your mains. So there is that constant balance. But the reality is, to make these decisions of, is this speaker suitable? we need to understand from a manufacturer, what does that data really mean and how was it derived?
Yeah.
So the simple first thing, it would be great. Like if nobody followed RP1 and gave all the data that CDO are going to push manufacturers to give us all the engineering data, just tell me on the spec sheet which test you did. Right. Maximum SPL is 120 dB using CEA2034. Or peak is 132 dB using AES 75. Okay, I can go and read those documents. I can then see, right, they did this test. This is what happened. Will it meet my requirements? Without knowing which test it was, it's just a guess.
Yeah.
So, as you said earlier, we don't like to guess.
No. Guessing is bad. Bad, bad, bad. And something that goes in line with what I was just talking about. I want you to put yourself in this situation where you're at a huge sports stadium, you're at a concert, and I want you to ask yourself, when you're in that position, do you perceive it as too loud? And I can almost assuredly guess, even though I don't like guessing, I can guess what you're thinking, and the answer is no, you don't think it's too loud. And the reason that is, in a lot of cases, is because if it's a sports stadium and people are screaming and stuff, there's no distortion. That's nature doesn't have, in a lot of cases, distortion. There's sounds that hurt your ears, but there's not really any distortion in nature. At a concert, you're using, and at stadiums, you're using speakers that are able to get to obscene SPL levels without distorting.
Yeah.
And so people get into this conundrum of, well, I feel like my subs aren't distorting. When they are, we just tolerate more distortion, as Ben said, at a lower frequency. But my speakers sound too loud, so I'm going to raise my bass, but I'm not going to raise my speakers. When in actuality, you're just hearing distortion in your speakers, and you're misconstruing it as loudness. When in actuality, when I listen to music, a lot of times I have an SPL meter up because in the Mad VR Experience Center, I will damage my hearing if I don't pay attention to that. If you have clear sound that is lacking in distortion, you can push to obscene levels without it being uncomfortable. It is dangerous, absolutely, because you can damage your hearing over time or over a short period of time if you're going to obscene levels, which is why I have an SPL meter up in there. But you can get to levels that are just ridiculous in level
without realizing it. That's the scary bit.
I have people come in, and this is primarily women with their spouses that will come in, and the women are like, well, I don't like how my partner's system sounds. It's too loud. And my response to that is, well, I think I know what's happening. I'm going to play you something, and I'm going to turn it up. And I'm not going to tell you when I'm turning it up. And I want you to tell me when it's too loud. And in virtually every situation, if I do that over a long enough period of time, I'm at like 135 dB and we're watching Imagine Dragons and they're sitting there rocking out, not complaining about anything. And I've got it showing peak of 135 encroaching on 140. And they're like, that was amazing. And then you show them and like, oh, I didn't realize that. And I say, well, the reason you're perceiving this as too loud is because something in that system is distorting. You're having reflection issues. The speakers, amps, or preamp are running out of gas. Something is causing you to perceive an uncomfortable level of loudness.
Yeah. And that's it's fun for subwoofers, isn't it? Because
you can get away with more.
When we talked about that frequency range and the at what level, that becomes really important in a subwoofer, especially an active sub. Because an active sub, in theory, has the ability, if you've designed that amplifier well, you'll keep it within its limits. You won't let it be turned up to a point where the sub explodes. So, I always enjoy the stories from Eric at Per Listen, the amount of phone calls they get when someone's gone out and bought some Per Listen subs, and they are not low cost and they are not small. Right? These are really premium products. And the first thing, someone will call up straight to the head office, call Per Listen, or they speak to Eric and say, yeah, I like them, but just not very loud, are they? They're not as loud as my old subs. And Eric will almost certainly be trying to stifle a giggle, like, they really are. Right, have you still got your old subwoofers? Plug them back in, grab an SPL meter, see how loud you're listening. then put the per listens back in. Yeah, turn it up to where you were listening before. It turns out it's not that the per listens aren't loud enough. You're listening 3 or 4 or 5 dB louder than you were on your old subs, and it's still distortion free and clean.
Yep.
So you don't perceive like you're just, oh, it's not very loud. No, it's louder than you were listening before, right? It's just so tight. That's part of their design. You know, they specifically limit distortion, right? They will limit output based on distortion. If distortion levels are increasing, that amplifier will absolutely limit peak output level to keep distortion under control. They are more focused on making a clean, high quality output than the loudest possible output. So it's easy. This is where these spec sheets need to compare. Like, we need to be like for like. You could take any subwoofer in the world and say, you know, this big 21, this whatever, right? I've got this ported 18. This ported 18 plays loads louder than this per listen dual 12. Right. But at what distortion levels? You know, when you see its frequency response is, you know, it's great down to 8 hertz. Is it still doing that when you turn it up full volume? We just don't know. Like, the spec sheets just don't tell us enough to know.
Yep.
So you have super clean at really high SPL. Yeah, just be careful. Because you don't get those signals back telling you, oh God, turn this down. That's fun. We have some questions.
Well, is there any other part of the measurement data that you want to talk about today?
I think we've probably, you know, we've explained how 2034 is done. I didn't really explain how peak was done, but it's a different test essentially. So you shouldn't be deriving peak data from a continuous test. It's done using a different test signal. It's a burst tone. So if that signal, the report says it was generated from pink noise, I would need to just dig in a little bit and understand how you've got a peak level using that test to get a peak level from pink noise. There's just some disparities there, but they are separate tests. But I would really suggest people focus on that continuous output. So the continuous that is taken from AS75 or 2034, their continuous rating, but CDO will call midterm. So it's a mid-duration test. We are confident from work that's been done in research that if you do the 2034 midterm or the AS75 midterm, either one of those tests using different stimulus on the same speaker, the result will be within 1.5 dB top. Like, they align. You know, if it doesn't matter which test you do of those two, the midterm lines up, and you can trust that if I'm comparing 120 dB on 2034, 120 dB on AS75, on the midterm, that is comparable. So what do? Right? Ask our manufacturers, what is this data? And if it's not either of those tests, can we see what is your continuous using 2034 or AS75? Because I want to compare it to this other product, and I want to know that the data I'm reading from you is the same as the data I'm reading from them. That's the only way to do it.
I agree. Okay. Well, we'll leave it at that. We'll probably do more talks about measurement data, probably dispersion, and what else could we talk about? Dispersion. Any other suggestions?
At some point, we're going to have to talk about amplifiers as well, aren't we?
Yeah, I actually had a conversation with Jeffrey today about that, and I think I want him to get us some data on amplifiers, because there's not enough data on amplifiers, especially for subwoofers.
Right.
And we need more data, baby. And
yeah, I mean,
there's certain manufacturers that provide data, and by certain, I mean like 1 or 2, but we need to be able to have comparative data to other manufacturers, and that doesn't exist. And amplifier data for subs, when you start getting down that low, that's hard.
Yeah, I mean, so many amplifiers are rated, you look at the amplifier spec sheet and it says, it's rated to this output 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Okay, well, in the world of infrasonic subs, what happens below 20 hertz? Does the amplifier not play it? Does it break? What would happen? And hey, I found this out firsthand when we moved from, we had our 32-inch subs here. We've got two 32s, and we had them running off a single 20,000 watt amplifier. So we'd split 10,000 to each sub, and it was pretty thunderous. There was a lot of output. When we switched those to two separate dedicated infrasonic subs, holy shit. Those 10,000 watts were not the same as the other 10,000 watts, right?
Yeah.
It was staggering. I mean, to a point where Peter nearly knocked the staircase down in this building. Let's be honest.
There is a big difference, but
go and tighten it up.
Unfortunately, there's not data out there, public data that shows this. Real quick, right. Vadotas789, just flood the chat. It's okay. Neither of us have, we've always gone with other channels that have more subscribers. Neither of these are going to have super chats enabled. So just drop it in chat. You're not going to hurt anybody's feelings.
What's super chat? You can tell I'm like so naive to social media.
Can pay to have their comments.
Oh, bullshit to that. You ask a question, we'll answer it.
Yeah. I don't like super chats. I don't feel like anybody should feel the need to pay to have their question.
No. Bullshit.
Just drop it in. Don't worry about it. If anybody complains about it, I'll ban them.
If the answer's really, really complicated, the answer that you'll get is phone one of us. This is a consultancy project.
Yeah.
There'll be an invoice. But if it's a question that can be answered, we're here to
even then, we're probably going to answer it. It's just, if it takes more time for me to answer it, we're going to have to do it offline.
Yeah, right. But no, I had no idea what super chats are. I'm new to this whole social media thing, right?
That's what they are.
Yeah, no, that's not a thing.
And if you guys ever have questions, do not hesitate to drop them in chat. If you're watching this in VOD form, do not hesitate to drop a question into the comments. Odds are, if it's a good question, we'll probably turn it into a video. So don't hesitate. We're here for questions. This is a complicated space. There's a lot of things that have to be considered. And even if you've been in the space for a long time, if you're not living and breathing the space like Ben and I are, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming sometimes for us, for the things that you have to be considered. I mean, it takes a long time to process things and wrap your head around it. So don't hesitate. If you want to gain knowledge, that's what this is all about. Knowledge sharing and making sure that people have the information to do what they need to do. So if you got questions, drop them in chat. We typically get to them in the order they come in. I stop from the top and work my way down.
I'm just going to make one last comment on why we are sat here once a week giving out this knowledge for free, right? So this is an industry that you and I both love, right? We love movies. We love the kit behind it. We love that we can make our living building people cool cinemas, right?
Yeah.
And my view on this is that there are a lot of bad home theaters out there. There is a lot that are done poorly. And if, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, I don't know what the equivalent of, is it Joe something, Joe Blogs,
Smith,
whatever you call the average man in the US, right? He goes around a friend's house and listen to my home theater and it's rubbish. He's not going to want to go and buy one or build one for himself, right? This whole thing to me is that this industry continues to grow in the face of VR and AI and all these other things that can take away from the shared experience of theater. It grows if everyone builds better ones. Because when they show them off, people are like, that's cool, I want one. So we're out here helping integrators do better, helping enthusiasts build the coolest systems. So when they show them off, more people want them, and this grows, right? That's how we get better products to market, is because the market's bigger. How we, the whole thing grows by us sharing what we know. So that's why we're here, right?
I'm reading some stuff. Okay. So there was a question up here made by Brian Cobb. Can a high channel count using Storm XT, utilizing all channels, 24 in my case, help to increase the overall SPL level? Do you ever use more speakers with this method to hit target SPL levels?
Okay, so that system can make more noise. But when we talk about doing the calibration of the requirements for that system, we are talking about individual channel. So you've got a case where you could be making arrays. Like, this is how commercial cinema is often working, is that they are arraying multiple speakers to get to a sound level. When we're talking about an SPL requirement, it will absolutely be per channel. Every individual channel on its own should be able to deliver the level that's required. Now, if you were to do, like, you've got 24 channels and you run all channel stereo, of course you can now make that room way, way louder than just playing 2. But when it's like an Atmos type track and an object pans, we need to know that when that object hits any one of those speakers, it can get to the level it needed to get to. So you can use more speakers to make it louder, but there's a difference between whether you can and whether you should rely on that to hit your numbers. Like, you need to know that that object will get to the level you were after when it has been panned to any individual channel.
So in the case of subs, it's a little different. Subs are typically used, at least in LFE, they're used as a system instead of each individually. So stacking subs and stuff to gain SPL can absolutely be used in those cases.
Subs are completely different, yeah.
Yeah. So if that's the direction you're going, sure. But if you're talking about Storm XT is more meant to create a more encompassing feeling, in my opinion. Now, Storm may, like if we had Matt or Gary or Olivier or any of those guys on to talk about this, they may say something different. But my experience with Storm XT, and I do use it, is that it makes the room feel more alive because it's allowing all speakers to be utilized at all times by taking an ambient track from the mix and pumping it to all unused channels. Right. So it makes it sound like sound is coming from everywhere all the time. It's not meant to increase SPL levels. It's more meant to increase immersion.
Right.
And it's cool. It's not for everybody. I like it. It's a subjective thing, but you should calibrate and stuff with it off. I don't even know that it would do anything with a calibration tone. I don't think it would, but I would turn it off.
There definitely are. If you're using an external test tone, there definitely are some processors, and I don't know on Storm particularly with XT, but where you suddenly put a test tone into a location and find it's coming out of 2 or 3 speakers because it's been upmixed. And yeah, you don't want to be doing your calibration using an upmixed tone.
Yeah.
That's suboptimal.
So this goes back to what Magnum was asking about people with boosted bass. And one reason they don't like it is because of the tonality. And he's asking, how do you know you have the right tonality in the system? Well, the Munson curve is a big part of it. I think a good part of this is flat, but subjective and experience.
So I guess I know I have the right tonality when I play something I like and I like how it sounds.
Yeah.
And this is the difference between, I'm quite critical of remote calibrations. I believe a calibration is done in the room with your ears. You have to have microphone data, like you're doing work using microphones, but you are verifying with your ears. And the final sign off for any calibration absolutely needs to be listening to some of your favorite demo clips, listening to some 2-channel music, listening to a whole load of content. Does this sound great? And then the tonality is right. It doesn't matter what it looks like on a graph if you don't like the sound of it.
And we did this, I've mentioned this before in the Mad VR Experience Center when Matt Trinkline and Adam Peltz were out to calibrate. We spent a ton of time calibrating and measured. Everything was perfectly flat. And then Adam would go back and he would listen to a clip that he knew really, really well and would go, I don't like the way that sounds. And then we would deviate. You're not going to do that during a remote calibration.
Right.
So it may sound good because you can derive a lot from data, but you're not going to get the experience that is brought into that calibration through the ears, that maybe they locate something that you probably could pick up in a measurement, but you'd have to go find it, and you'd have to measure the right thing, and you have to run the right test, and you have to listen to the right tone, and your ears go wrong, and then go and adjust it. And you don't get that through remote.
How many times did you watch the scene in the bar of Desperado?
Oh my God. I love that scene though.
Adam knows every tiny intricate nuance of that vocal.
Yes.
And you play it, and within a few seconds he's like, vocal doesn't sound right.
No. And then you play it enough and you start picking up on it. Absolutely. Right. And then you go back and oh, you're right. Like that was weird. And you don't realize it, but you bring a lot of experience in. And I find that the more experience I have and the other guys that have the same level of experience, I think all of our expectations start to collide, where we all kind of have the same expectation of what something should sound like. And we can all sit in a room, and we've done this because we've all sat in these calibrations, and we'll look at each other and go, does that sound right? What's going on there? And we'll go, oh yeah, that's weird. And then we're all able to pick up on these certain things.
Yeah.
But tonality, I think you make it flat, and then you deviate. You got to start from a set position, a set variable,
100%,
and then deviate from there. And I think, and people are probably going to disagree with me, I think everybody's going to have a little bit of a different taste. And I think hearing and how your ears work and what hearing loss you have can absolutely change this. But start flat and then deviate to your expectation.
Yeah.
What do you think about DIY speakers versus high-end speakers?
I haven't heard enough. Like DIY speakers can mean anything, right? It can be a kit, it can be completely homemade. So the reason that I couldn't use DIY speakers in a system for a client is, I think I've said before, we are using engineering data to make predictions before the room is built. Mm-hmm. So I need to know exactly what that speaker is going to do, maybe 2 years before the room has physically even been built. I need to know where it's going to go, exactly how much energy I'm sending to the first reflection wall, how much is hitting the floor. I need to know all of that. Otherwise, I can't place it in advance. And I have no issue at all with people buying hi-fi speakers by putting them in a room, listening. Like, go to a hi-fi dealer, borrow 10 pairs of speakers, put them in your room. Which ones do I like best? Keep them, right? You found the ones that work best in your room by trial and error.
The key there is listen in your room.
Right, in your room. The problem with doing this in a theater environment is that you can't really just put all the speakers in the room with the subs. Like, it can take 5 days to do a proper calibration, to get the calibration absolutely dialed down, right, and get the best from it. Well, you can't do that with 10 sets of speakers. So I'm a fan of heavily engineered products that come from experts. I'm not a transducer designer. I'm not a speaker designer. I'm a cinema designer. I like a good chef. Gordon Ramsay doesn't raise cows, right? I am relying on somebody to make the best ingredients possible for me to make the dish. And I need to know exactly what's going to happen, right? So I can't say any DIY speaker is good or bad because I can't work with them in our business. That doesn't mean that you can't, but my concern would be if you don't know what it's going to do, you are guessing, right? So you could buy a speaker that is well regarded, but you don't know if it will work for you unless you've got measurement data on it.
Now, there is something to be said about this. And I know this is the pathway a lot of people take that go down DIY. They'll say, well, I have the same driver that's in these speakers.
Right.
No, you don't. And the reason that is because it may have started as that driver, but the really high-end manufacturers, and I know this for a fact with Ascendo and JTR, they are heavily modified.
Right.
You may be getting the driver from that manufacturer, but it's not the same driver. And it's, in most cases, especially from the higher end stuff, is going to be vastly different. The reason companies like Ascendo and JTR and other big name manufacturers utilize driver facilities, especially in subwoofers, is because those guys are set up to manufacture those drivers.
Yeah.
It takes
Yeah.
a lot of engineering, equipment to manufacture these drivers, and Ascendo and JTR, as two perfect examples, are not big enough, and Perlisten are not big enough to be able to do this. Now, Perlisten, and I think Ascendo, and I don't know about JTR, they own a lot of their manufacturing, but in a lot of the speakers, you're not getting the same speaker, even though you think you are, and people will say, "Oh, this speaker's using this driver." I can almost promise you it's not.
But even if it is, that's one part. So if you don't have the same cabinet, you're now going to have different baffle step response.
Yes.
So you've got different diffraction off different edges, unless it's exactly the same shape. Unless it's got the same density and material stiffness, you're going to get resonances at different points.
Yeah.
Unless you've got the same crossover.
Yep.
And it's easy to say, right, well, it's the same crossover. I've got their schematic. We'll copy the exact same schematic. But there's tolerances at play. So when you look at a really, really, really great speaker, and this would be a point, okay, so take a Perlisten, the difference between like a special edition and a normal one of the same speaker. One of the, lots of things were done, like there's things have been improved to make them better. But one of the ways they improve it is by closer matching tolerances on components. Right, we're building the crossover. We need to take this capacitor. Well, our normal tolerance is within a few percent, but for the special editions, we want to pair match them to within 1%. I'm making these numbers up. I don't know what their tolerances are, but it's a thing, right? You buy a batch of 1,000 capacitors, and they could have a 5, 6, 7, whatever percentages are, tolerance across that batch. Well, if you want to make the best, you'll pair match them to be essentially identical. So even if you've got the schematic of someone's crossover, unless you know exactly what tolerance is, every single part they used was picked to, you don't know that your crossover is the same as theirs. You just don't, right?
I think part of using the manufacturer's consistency, and you know what you're getting. I am not saying that you can't make an excellent DIY speaker, but effectively at that point, you're your own manufacturer.
Right. And
that's okay.
Right. There is no disputing that costs here are significant. If you are making a speaker you've engineered and you've done a great job of engineering, right? It's all been modeled in COMSOL, and you've hired consultants to look at breakup modes, right? You've done all this incredible work. You have it manufactured in the Far East, right? You've now got cabinetry, you've got different things all brought together in a factory in the Far East. You then have to ship it back to Europe, US, wherever it's going, right? There's import duties to pay. There's shipping fees to pay. It lands with a distributor. The distributor sells it to an installer or a store. The distributor has to live, right? He's got kids. He's got to put dinner on the table. The retailer needs to live. At this point, the bill of materials is vastly different from a finished product.
Yep.
And if you're doing DIY, you cut all the middlemen out, right? There's not going to be a distributor of a finished product. There's not going to be a retailer of a finished product. You're buying parts at lower margins. You're not necessarily shipping a big cabinet across the world because you go to a hardware store and buy some wood and make it yourself. So of course, a DIY speaker is going to look better value.
Yeah.
When you look at its outright cost. There's no getting around that. Nobody can make a speaker at the level of an Ascendo, a Perlisten, a JTR, whatever they are, and deliver them at the same price if they use that traditional route to get to market. You get stuff in return, right? You get somewhere for support that you can take it back to, right? You might have an integrator that can help. Like, the value proposition has to be the entire thing, not just looking at, well, I could make that speaker for half price.
And if you can, that's great.
Great.
We're not discrediting you at all. You can make some great stuff.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of engineering. There's a lot of know-how if you want to do it right.
Yeah. And there's loads of tools. Like, there's loads of tools online that will help you design a speaker.
Because if you think about it, all of the manufacturers that you just talked about, it's kind of what they're doing. It's just they're doing it. I mean, that's what every manufacturing process
is what they're doing. But I mean, COMSOL costs £40,000.
But my point is,
license, right?
My point is that you're doing the same thing on different scales. They
Right.
have the expertise. If you have
Right.
the expertise in all those tools, fantastic.
Yeah.
But you're paying the price of what you pay is to not have to do that.
If you've got one of the best transducer designers in the world living in your home, and you have ComSol, which is like 40,000 a year for a piece of software, and you have all the manufacturing facility and a paint shop and a polishing shop, and if you've got all those things, you can make some per listens.
Yes.
I don't have those things.
No.
So I buy them.
And I'm not smart enough.
I'm not smart enough. That's very true.
So Vade asks, he was talking about super chats, and I think he brings up a good point. And this is the last, well, there's a couple more questions, but this is a good question. I'm asking because flush and straight aiming in wall speakers are shown in almost all promotional material.
Yes.
Yes. Right. And that is
I can
bad.
answer that really simply. And it comes back to the same person who wrote the spec sheet. Photos are done by the marketing department, not by an engineering department.
Yep.
Nobody in engineering thinks you should put that speaker flush in a wall if you're using it as a front wide. There is no audio engineering. They cry inside when they find out they've spent ages engineering a speaker and you fired it 70 degrees away from where you're sat.
Yep.
The marketing department don't care. They're there to sell speakers. And they know that if they show this really complicated wall construction where you've angled it at yourself, they are going to put off people from wanting to buy them.
Yep.
So the reality is, just don't do it. They can't show you it in its proper light because it will put you off buying it.
Now, sometimes you have a compromise and it's unavoidable depending on the aesthetic of the room and all of that. Sometimes that comes up, but know that you are sacrificing performance for that particular install application and aesthetic or what have you. So that's the reason. It does not mean that it is acceptable. Even the ones with aimable tweeters, you are still compromising because the woofer's off axis, and you're creating some abnormalities with the tweeter being angled with its waveguide and a bunch of other stuff. You're changing geometry of the speaker, which is bad.
Right.
And if you don't have measurement data for that particular speaker and that particular angle and all this with that driver config, not a good idea. But it's a compromise. And as long as you know the compromise before going in and you can make that decision full knowingly, that's okay. As long as you're willing to give that up. But don't think that that's the expected use case. In virtually every application, you want the speaker to be angled more towards you.
Right.
And sometimes you may want it slightly off axis, like coaxials. You may want 10 to 15 degrees off axis and some other things. Horns can help get away from this type of noise if you get a little bit off axis from the tweeter. There's things you can do, but don't believe the marketing materials and don't say, oh, they installed it in this particular brochure and that's what it looks like. Don't believe that. If you got questions, feel free to
There's one
that.
specific one from Jeffrey that I think ultimately is going to have to be a separate episode entirely. Opinions on floating floors like Poe's hush frame on a concrete floor. So
where is that one?
It was at 14:56 my time, about just over 35 minutes ago. So here's the thing. I define the way you feel the sound as two ways. And I don't know what the rest of the industry calls these things, but they are how they are called in our business. We talk about tactile rumble and we talk about chest slam. And Ryan and I offline have talked about this loads of times. Like, this is something that both of us are quite interested in how we maximize and deal with. So at Foundry, it's quite interesting. We've got one demo room upstairs on a mezzanine floor. It's on part of a steel construction, and one room which is built on concrete. We're in a rented building. It was just easier to build it on a concrete floor. And the way bass feels in those two rooms is entirely different.
Yep.
Upstairs on that suspended sprung floor, we put the energy in the floor. That energy shakes the seats. You feel it. And if I want to go for loads more bass in that room, the floor is going to get unpleasantly bouncy, right? It's going to be like being at a theme park.
Yep.
So there becomes a limit of how much output I would put into that room at the lower end, because you feel like you're on a trampoline. Like, it really would start to move a lot. We've got 4 big subs in there, right? It would move a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Downstairs, the front row is directly on it's not directly, but within 10 millimeters. There's not a
It's on a
lot.
floor, it's not
Right.
on
It's
necessarily as much of a
basically
floating floor.
on an unsprung concrete floor. And all of the energy you feel there is it's a change in particle velocity, right? You've got a wave of pressure that is airborne and it hits you. We are not shaking that seat. We are hitting you with airborne
Well,
pressure
the
variations.
pressure may be shaking the seat, but the driver, the
Sure.
floor is not doing it.
Right. And of course, it is also coupling to that seat, and you're feeling that too. But you could stand up on that concrete floor, like being at an outdoor gig, and you get that
Yes.
thump in the chest, that wave that everybody's experienced from a decent kick drum at a festival, right?
Do you like floating floors in this application?
So I don't dislike either. I like the ability to show both and choose which one the client wants and dial it in. So
But for you,
we
which would you choose? I know what I would choose. I'm pretty opinionated on this.
some semi-sprung, right? So we have a riser design, a timber riser design that is not very sprung. It's pretty stiff, but has some compliance. Um, it depends on the room size, like it depends on lots of things, but I like I love, in fact, that's not fair to say I love that really airborne slam that you
Yes.
get from a drum kit outside. And I like to be able to generate the pressure required to get chest slam.
Yeah.
And that can't be at the expense of rumble, right? Like bass shakers are not going to do it for me. I need big chest
How
variations across the whole surface of my chest that kicks me in the liver, right? I just need it. That's what
this is how I look at it. The all of the tactile stuff, and I'm not saying that it's bad, and floating floors and all, I view it as a compromise in you're chasing something that the system is not quite able to deliver, and you're trying to get it in a different way using less of X, Y, or Z medium. If you have enough, and in this case, subwoofers, and the ability to pressurize the room and the room can take the pressurization, I don't think you need it.
right.
If you can do it. And this is, I am not saying that having a floating floor or using tactile transducers or direct attach subs, I've used all of them. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm simply saying that it is a tool to use in substitute of more subs. If you have more subs, I don't think you need it.
Yeah,
Because
and
subs
I'm
them
not I'm not anti floating floors at all because we would use them for isolation. So we would
Yes.
intentionally be using it to reduce sound transmission to other rooms, right? So
Yeah.
there's absolutely a reason for a floating floor. Sometimes in our designs, we might have to try and dampen the effect of that floating floor. If it's a fairly small hush frame type floor, because actually we want less of that tactile rumbly vibration because we are chasing the airborne slam.
Mhm.
So you've got to balance it. And I have a preference from one to the other. I like slam.
Yeah.
And I have no idea what the rest of the world call these things, right? But I think you know that slam from a kick drum when you're in a field and
I
there's a
know
big
exactly what you're
oasis,
talking
right?
about, but my argument is that if you have enough subwoofer power and you can pressurize the room enough, the subs are gonna do it to the furniture anyway, and you don't
Right,
need to have the floor do it.
right.
The floor to me is a compromise and feels unnatural. I don't like the way that it feels, but if you're chasing that rumble or whatever feeling you're trying to get with which I think is part of what people get when they turn subs on and they're not properly integrated to chase that slam and you run into this bloated bait. You're compromising in some
Yeah,
capacity.
yeah,
And in my compromise in the room that I designed, I was unwilling to do that. And I was chasing something and I needed the power to be able to do it. There's nothing wrong with going either way. It's just understanding what do I need to do this? If I want to do it this way, what do I need to accomplish that? And then making that happen. So for me, I think even what you're saying when everything has its place and you're trying to do you're trying to sound isolate, to me, that in of itself is a compromise. I would rather have it on a concrete floor. because then I don't have to worry about it. You are compromising by having something above or
Right.
and below you, and that is a compromise in and of itself. And if I can avoid that, I'm going to.
Yeah.
So, good question though. We need to have a more of a conversation about that. There was somebody talking about Michael amplifiers. So Ben talked about subwoofer amplifiers not quite being the same. Please post somewhere on the recommended ones you think they run about 10,000 watts because I would love to have solid infrasonics. There are, I only know of one.
I was gonna say, I have very limited experience with rack-mounted amps that put out huge amounts of power,
It's
stable into very low frequency.
it's very hard to do. This is relatively new for the industry. And I hate this, son. I really need to address this. Um, and I only know of one amplifier that's able to do it. Now
I'm sure in the pro world there may be more. They're probably not sold on that capability, but they
maybe
have it. But we both have the Ascendo 10K infrasonics, right? You've
yes.
got those. Yeah, we both have those. I've just put 18 of
10K2s
those in
is
a
the
rack,
one
and they're
specifically we're
fun.
talking about, the single U, the one
Yes,
U chassis.
I mean it has in its product name 10K IS, right? It says, yeah, the IS infrasonic. There is specifically an Ascendo part number, which is a 10K IS, and they are loaded full of capacitors. Like it's just taking in huge amounts of power, and it has the ability to sustain the realistic duration low output. What's likely to happen on an amplifier that's not designed for this is that it will run out of steam. It will get to a point where it can't pull in power fast enough for what it's actually trying to deliver, and it falls apart. Like not physically falls apart, but it can't sustain it. And
You're gonna clip.
that 10K IS can sustain for a realistic duration, ultra low frequency at ultra high level. And I mean, it's aggressive. Like
Yeah.
when you realize like what a big driver can do when it's being powered by that much power, it's staggering.
It's a lot. And this is, I say this all the time. This is not us saying this is the only one. This is the only one
Right.
we know of because there
Yeah.
is very little data, if any, that exists in this space. And there are a lot of manufacturers that say they can, and they may to a certain level. But that 10K2 IS is able to get, I want to say it's -3 is 3 hertz. It is absurd in what it's able to do. It may not be that. I mean, that's ridiculous, but it's able to do absurd levels down to 3 hertz, which is insane. And it
Yeah.
does deliver. They're not quiet though. So if you go down that pathway, uh,
Do not put them in your room.
no, they're single U chassis and they have Delta. I think they're Deltas, like 60. No, they're smaller than that, like 40 mil fans. And oh boy, are they loud. I have, how many do I have? 10 of those amps in my room. And they're in a different room. And as soon as I walk out of the theater, if I have those amps on, I can hear the fans. And they're in a
So
totally different part of the basement.
I'm not sure when they changed, but there has been a slight running revision, and the newest ones don't run quite as loud as the older ones.
Oh,
I know this because the job where we've put 18, we sent 2 out there for testing,
mhm,
like 6 months before we sent the other 16 out. And the original 2 do run noisier.
mhm.
I don't know if there was a running addition to the fans. I'm not sure. I hoped it was a firmware thing, but it doesn't seem to be because they're all on the same firmware now. But they do run a little bit quieter, the newer ones.
That's good.
Not loads quieter. You still
My
wouldn't put them
advice
in
is
your
just
room
do not
issue.
put them in your room and it's not a problem.
Yeah,
You're
they
not
need
going
to
to
be in
want
the
those in the room anyway because of the amount of heat they generate. They idle at almost 150 watts. You don't want that in your room. They're dumb, but they need that in order to deliver
right.
what you're asking of them.
And there's no, it's not a, I'm going to be honest, right? And Jeffrey will probably, honestly, I'm going to get my balls cut off for this.
Yeah.
It's not a consumer friendly product, right? So there is no IP control to turn it on or off. You turn it
No.
on and off with a physical switch. And
No, you can
the
get
other
around
way of
that.
turning it on or off. Sorry?
You can get around that.
I
You
get
not
around
thought
it by
about it?
using contactors and literally killing the power to it. But
Oh, yeah. I mean, Shelly relays are great for that.
right. We build big distribution panels with relays using industrial grade switching, like programmable logic controllers, because the inrush current's huge. Like, you turn on a handful of those in one go, you'll just trip breakers. So they
That's
have to
bet.
be staggered.
Yeah, you gotta stagger the timing to be able to turn them on.
Right.
Absolutely.
So yeah, if you've put them on the other side of a house and they're pulling 150 watts each in standby, you don't want to, the polar bears would love it if you turn those off when you're not using them. Don't just leave them on 24/7. The
There was
polar
a
bears
noticeable
really
dip
don't need that.
in my power bill when I took them off idle and was able to turn them off using the Shelly relays.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you mean they're not I'm gonna change what you said. They're consumer friendly, but they are something that absolutely has to be considered in order
Right.
to implement correctly, because they are not like a typical residential amplifier. They are
Can you
much.
I don't know this. You'll tell me this. You might not even know either. Can you even run them on 110 volts?
I wouldn't.
I don't even know if you can.
Uh,
I
I think you can.
Can you? I'm looking at a
Pretty
spec
sure
sheet.
you
Oh,
can.
no, operating voltage, 160 to 270 volts
Okay.
AC.
Then no, you can't.
Right. So you can't even run. So when I say it's not a consumer friendly, you can't walk into a store, go and buy 4 of these things, take them home, and just set your like. There's some engineering to be done to make sure
Yeah.
these things are going
Frankly,
to
I
work.
wouldn't want to anyway because of the increase in heat output from running them on 110. I would
Right.
want the higher voltage from 240 because I can run them at a lower current.
Yeah.
That's why they're doing it. I mean,
But yeah, you're not just going to walk into a store and buy them and plug them in. Like, and that's what I meant by not consumer friendly. It's not a retail product. You need to consider
no.
it. You need to do some engineering around it.
It
Like,
needs to be considered as a sum of all of its parts and as part of an entire system than just, "Hey, I'm gonna buy this and get something better." You've gotta make considerations and frankly, consolidations in order to make them work
yeah,
correctly. You're gonna need airflow because you'll overheat your system. They will overheat if you don't have adequate airflow for.
I'm just gonna jump back quickly to Derek, who's just fired a question in before we wrap up, because this is important and we're gonna have to go after this properly. We're gonna have to talk about this. So, is chest slam not a different frequency range from a tactile? Well, yes and no, and
Depends on the definition.
both can exist across a broad range. So when you say you've been in highly capable rooms that didn't have like chest slam, that is likely a time domain problem.
Yes.
So we've talked quite a lot about the time domain, and to get that real slam, you need that very fast, I'm going to say instantaneous, but it's not, but a very fast transient of pressure, right? It's outside, you have a single wave comes from a PA on the stage or a live drum, right? If you're stood by a live kick drum, you get a single wave, right? And it hits you in one go and it passes through you and it never comes back, right? There's no reflections. You're in a field. There's something for it to bounce off. When you're in a room and you've put subwoofers in different positions, some maybe ahead of you, some behind you, it might be at the sides, that wave may not arrive perfectly at the same time from all of them. It definitely doesn't, like, you can't do that at all seats. If you've gone like some front, some back, you cannot get that wave of pressure to hit every seat at the same time.
Nope.
It physically can't. That's one of the things that waveforming from Trinnov kind of does bring us, is actually moving more towards a wave that moves through the room. Then you've got all the reflections, right? So to get the real slam, we focus on reducing the difference in time that moves through a frequency, right? So we really focus on the crossover particularly, but as that subwoofer plays at different frequencies, how short is the delay of all of that pressure going from the initial impulse to maximum power, like peak pressure, and we can tune that. So we can tune. We have Andy Summers on, who doesn't like me, and THX Cinemas with JBL Pro have been doing this for a decade. They haven't, because they don't play that low, so they haven't. Just haven't. But it's really important to get the time alignment right to get slam. You can get slam at a huge broad range of frequencies, but it's complicated, really complicated.
Especially for multi-row, multi-seat.
Yeah.
It's easier to facilitate at single seat locations than it is at multi-seat, because your timing references change. Everything's different seat to seat. Everything's different. And this is kind of a benefit that big theaters have. They're in bigger rooms. It becomes more of an issue in smaller. Your time goes out the window. Reflections become a problem. There's all kinds of issues that small rooms bring in. THX or Andy, I can tell you, if you're talking about lower frequency stuff, no commercial cinemas do low frequency stuff. You're not going to get anything really under 30 hertz in those rooms.
I actually used to live near there, and it's not a great cinema. So that's it's not anywhere comparable to.
I think a lot of people have a misconception on what infrasonic is and what it feels like. Commercial cinemas and really commercial spaces in general don't do it because it's not possible to deliver power-wise.
Right.
It's physically not possible.
This is the challenge, right? And it is a challenge of why there is discussion around creating more of his tactile bass, because actually slam is hard. I had one of the best compliments I've ever had a couple of days ago. Last week.
I want to address this. In the real world, bass does not press on our bodies. If you mean there's no chest slammer, have you ever stood next to something like an F-18, an F-16, an F-35, an F-20, any jet, like fighter jet that is taking off? You have this pressure that is hitting you from the low frequency waves, and it is overwhelming, and it's slamming into your chest. So to say that that doesn't happen, it absolutely happens.
There's real confusion and discussion around, like, so we know that there is a speed of sound. And when I talk to people about particle velocity, it's really easy to misunderstand that particle velocity is not directly related to the speed of sound. And when we increase particle velocity, then we can absolutely create this sense of slam. Now, we talked in an earlier episode about areas of high velocity and areas of high pressure in a room. This becomes really important, right? If you want that slam, you have to be creating high velocity. So the whole design revolves around creating high velocity differentials that absolutely do create slam, right? We've all experienced it at gigs, so you can't dispute it doesn't exist, because we've all felt it, right? It's really simple. So yeah, there we go. But the interesting thing is the range of frequencies that you can deliver it at. Most people have never experienced it lower down, like 20, 30, 40, 50 hertz, because they don't have the ability to generate the velocities with accurate time alignment. Like the time domain on most systems falls apart the lower you go. Yep. So there is something that many people won't ever actually have experienced. It doesn't mean it's not possible. It means it's really hard.
I think, Andy, you're trying to simplify this too much. Infrasonic bass is everywhere, and if we took it away, that pressure change, you would notice. And I think a big part of why I'm chasing infrasonic is even when you're not hearing it, it's really low level. There's this low level feeling of, all right.
So the compliment I was going to say we got last week was from a PhD candidate who I don't actually know what he's in, but it's in immersive audio production or acoustics. Like he's specifically interested in producing immersive content, right? Working in anechoic chambers and stuff. And has interned at 3 major loudspeaker companies, in summer internships and stuff, and sat in the Screen 1 at Foundry. And after the first demo, let's be honest, Peter had given it some juice. His comment was like, holy shit, I didn't know bass could be that tight in a room. I've never experienced anything like that inside a room. Come on.
Yeah.
Because it can be done, right? It can be done, but it's really hard. And you can get that same feel as an outdoor gig indoors.
To be frank, I blocked Andy because I'm not going to sit here and tolerate that it's about ego. This isn't about ego. This is about showcasing what's possible. And if you don't talk about this stuff, this is not saying that X, Y, or Z systems are better or whatnot. It's simply saying that in talking about objective facts and what can be done. And unfortunately, in order to pursue some of this stuff, you need exponential amounts of power, capability, subs, all of this. And that is a big reason why commercial cinemas don't do it, because the ROI is simply not there for them.
Yeah, it's not profitable.
And not only is the ROI not there, if you play down into these infrasonic levels, you're going to contaminate theaters that are around that one that's emitting that sound. Because even if you have concrete, if the wavelength is long enough, then concrete is not thick enough, it's going to go into the other theaters and you're going to ruin the experience from adjacent cinemas. So there's issues with doing this in a commercial space. And I think that's a big reason why it's now starting to only take place in residential. But to say that this stuff doesn't happen in real life, I don't know where you're getting. And then your car analogy to say you don't feel that in car, I mean,
yeah,
I don't know where you're going with
we'll wrap it up today because we know that we've experienced it and it's not an ego thing. There is quality level we can demonstrate. So there was one question in here. I actually don't know who it's from now. Whether someone was cool enough to come and visit us at Foundry. Like 100%. We love showing it off, right? So it's not open generally to the public, like just walk in, but contact us to make an appointment and 100% we'll hang out.
It was Superfly.
Whoever it was. I was okay. I don't know who E4 Superfly is, but you're definitely cool enough because you love the stuff we love. And I think it was another question of, do we do consultancy? I think, I don't know. Do you do separate consultancy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we do it all over the world. Weirdly, I actually have less local work when I have global work.
Same.
We do. Not long ago, we had work on 5 continents at the same time, right? So we're hired guns to help enthusiasts or integrators. Like a lot of our work is actually doing consultancy for other professionals that they then deliver to clients. So 100%, we do those kind of things. It's all there.
Yeah, absolutely. Contact information is in the description. The email addresses for both myself and Ben can be found there. And if you have questions, feel free to fire away. I'm going to be frank. If you have questions and it's just questions, it's probably better to ask me. Ben is probably going to be better for direct consultancy. Ben, would you agree?
It depends. We do a huge range of stuff. So try us. We bounce things between each other. If something came to me that is better for you, we can bounce it. Like, try us. Hit us up. Talk about what you need to do, what you want.
Or just CC both of us on the email.
Yeah, we'll work it out.
We'll get you taken care of. But anyway, guys, thanks for joining the session. Enjoy your home theater journeys. And I'm going to leave it on Derek. I think people lose sight of the point that when you all talk about this stuff, that you must have infra. I think it's all experience-based. It's all based on what you know and what the status quo is. And Ben and I are of the point of we are constantly trying to pursue the best of what things can get. It does not mean that that's what has to be done. It simply means that that's what our goal is. And if the people that are trying to implement this stuff are not trying and moving towards what we'll call perfection, we'll never get there. But if that's not our goal,
right,
what can you expect from us to deliver for you?
Yeah, and I would say, I bet we've both been in loads of rooms that were incredible, wonderful place to spend time, that didn't attempt to do anything under 20 hertz.
No.
So I think when it's there, the experience gets better.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean I don't love rooms without it. Like 100%. I've been in loads of rooms that don't come close. Like I've been in rooms that top out above 25 hertz that still, for what they do, the dimensions of it, the space, the budget, are incredible. It's not required, but when you've got it, things get better. They just, yeah, it's great.
We just want the experience, regardless of what it is, regardless of the compromises that have to be made, the budget, whatever, to be as good as it can be. That's it. Try and
Cool.
leave nothing on the table. But we'll leave it
Right.
from there. I don't know what
Back to
next
paying
week's
work.
conversation is going to be about. It's going to be something about measurement data, I'm sure. Probably dispersion, because we haven't talked at all about that. But we'll talk. We'll have something scheduled here soon. Enjoy your home theater journeys. Enjoy the rest of your week. Hopefully you have a great Monday. If you guys need equipment, have questions, or need consultancy, feel free to reach out to Ben and I. Our contact information is in the descriptions down below. But we will see you guys in the next video.
Cheers all.
Good one.